Hey friends, tonight we're heading back to one of the worst days in human history, a time of boils, beaks, and bad decisions. Welcome to the era of the Black Death. Forget fantasy novels and plague doctor costumes, this was real, raw, and very, very gross. And no, you wouldn't survive it, not even close. But before we dive into rat-infested streets and questionable medieval remedies, hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy grim history delivered softly. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I always love seeing our little sleep-deprived history club. Now, dim the lights, tuck yourself in, and let's gently descend into one of the darkest chapters of the past. Good morning, with your first symptoms. You wake up on a pile of straw that smells vaguely like goat and decisively like sweat. Your mouth is dry, your body aches, and for some reason your left armpit feels weird. You reach over to scratch and there it is, a lump, a swollen, tender, pulsing lump. You touch it again, hoping it's just a bug bite. It's not. It's warm, growing, and absolutely not part of your original design. Congratulations, that's a bubo, and it means you've officially joined the club no one wants to be in. You sit up slowly, joints creaking like a broken door hinge. Your head throbs, your back is damp with sweat, and the blanket you've been using is actually just an old burlap sack with questionable stains. Someone coughed nearby. Not a polite, covered cough, but a deep, wet one that echoes across the one-room hut you share with 6 other people and a chicken. Your little brother is pale and shivering. Your mother hasn't spoken since last night. Your father is still asleep, or maybe not. No one wants to check. Outside, the church bell rings. Not for prayer this time, for death. Someone else didn't make it through the night. That makes 5 this week. The gravediggers are running out of space, and frankly, patience. You try to stand, but the floor is cold stone and your feet are bare. Every step sends a jolt through your swollen groin and armpits. Your breath is short, your heartbeat irregular, and your skin, oh, that spot on your thigh, has turned a gentle shade of purple overnight. Nice. You're not going to the doctor, because there isn't one. Well, technically there is. He wears a mask shaped like a bird, carries herbs in his pockets, and mostly recommends bleeding you with a dull knife or suggesting you pray harder. And praying? You've done plenty. You prayed when your neighbor died last week. You prayed when the priest got sick. You prayed when your cousin coughed up black mucus and fell flat during supper. At this point, even God is avoiding your village. You step outside, wrapped in a cloak that used to be your uncle's, and try not to inhale too deeply. The air smells of rot, smoke, and fear. The streets are quiet, too quiet. Even the rats seem on edge. Your fever climbs. Your thoughts blur. You think about water, but the bucket by the door is empty, and walking to the well is a risk. You don't want to collapse in public, not because it's embarrassing, but because anyone who falls in the street gets tossed onto the cart. You blink at the morning sun, and it feels wrong. Too bright, too hot, too indifferent. This is your morning now. This is your life. And it's only just begun. You're home. Isolation is not an option. You turn around and take in your living space, if we can call it that. It's technically a house, 4 walls, a roof, a door that doesn't quite close, but calling it a home feels generous. It's a one-room wooden box that smells like damp hay, boiled onions, and unresolved family tension. There are no windows. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof where smoke is supposed to escape, but usually just hangs around like an unwanted relative. The walls are warped. The floor is dirt, actual dirt, not the trendy kind you might see in a spa garden. You share this cozy little micro-kingdom with your entire family. Parents, siblings, maybe an aunt who never left after just visiting, a goat, 2 chickens, and unofficially, a dozen rats who think they pay rent. And no, there is no bedroom. Everyone sleeps wherever there's space, or warmth, or relative dryness. Privacy isn't just a luxury, it's a foreign concept. When one person rolls over at night, everyone else feels it. When someone coughs, everyone tenses. And when someone dies, well, you move over and make more room. because there's no place to go and nowhere to hide. Quarantine, isolation, social distancing, those things haven't been invented yet. And even if they had, you couldn't afford them. If your brother's coughing up blood, he's still sleeping next to you. Not because you want to share germs, but because there's literally nowhere else for him to go. You want to step outside for air, but your neighbour's hut is 3 feet away, and he's yelling again, probably at his wife, or the sky, or maybe the fleas. Between the screaming kids, the hacking coughs, and the unshakable scent of goat urine wafting up from the corner, the idea of peace and quiet sounds like witchcraft. And that bucket in the corner? That's your bathroom, shared by all, emptied only when someone remembers, or trips over it. Either way, it's full. There is no Lysol, no ventilation, no bleach. Your best weapon against infection is a damp rag, and the hope that someone lit enough incense at church last week to kill airborne sin. So when people say, just stay home if you're sick, you'd love to. You really would. But your home is a petri dish with a roof. And outside, the plague is waiting. Inside, it's already moved in. Personal hygiene. Forget about soap. At some point, as your fever simmers and the goat in the corner coughs, which is somehow not the most alarming thing in the room, you think, maybe I should freshen up. That's adorable. Let's start with the basics. Soap doesn't exist in your world. At least, not the nice-smelling, skin-friendly, lavender-infused miracle you're used to. The medieval version of soap is a rough lump made from lard and ash, if you're lucky enough to own any. It stings, smells like old firewood, and might give you a rash that competes with the plague for your attention. Water? Technically available, realistically contaminated. You'd have to hike to the nearest river or communal well, where the water is a suspicious mix of frog, dust, and upstream regrets. You haul it back in a wooden bucket that leaks at the seams, then heat it over a fire that smokes more than it burns. That's assuming you even have wood, because gathering firewood from the wrong forest can get you arrested, or fined, or whipped. Nature isn't free here. Now, bathing. Medieval folks don't bathe regularly, and not just because of the inconvenience. No, they actually believe bathing opens your pores and lets disease in. That's right. Staying clean is dangerous. The prevailing wisdom is, cover the filth with more filth, and pray it doesn't move. If, by some miracle of motivation, you do manage to fill a tub with warm water, guess what? You're not the only one using it. First goes your dad, then your mom, then your siblings, in descending order of age and ascending levels of crust. By the time it's your turn, the water is a greyish soup of body oils, stray hairs, and secrets. You hesitate, but not for long. It's either that or stay itchy. Speaking of itch, you're crawling. Lice, fleas, and probably a few insects science hasn't discovered yet. They live in your hair, your clothes, your bedding, and your dignity. Everyone has them. Nobles too. Even monks. They just scratch more quietly. There's no shampoo, no conditioner. Your hair is stringy and stiff like straw with ambition. You smell like a barn that's lost hope. And your skin? A patchwork of grime, bite marks, and irritation. You try not to touch your face, but then again, your face hasn't been washed in 3 weeks, so what's the point? And deodorant? Hilarious. Your best option is hanging a pouch of dried herbs around your neck, which does nothing except confuse the flies into thinking you're a spicy corpse. In short, your hygiene routine consists of not dying and maybe rinsing your hands in cold rain if God feels generous. So yes, you're officially gross, but it's okay. So is everyone else. Medical treatment, bloodletting, charms, and the scent of raw onions. You're burning up now. Your skin is hot. Your vision swims, and that lump under your arm has tripled in size. You feel like death. And judging by the way your sister just crossed herself when she looked at you, you probably smell like it too. Time to see a doctor. Except, this is 1348. So what you're actually getting is a man in a giant bird mask with a stick. He enters your home like a dark omen, robe flowing, gloves creaking, eyes hidden behind dark glass. His beak-shaped mask is stuffed with dried flowers, herbs, and whatever else he thinks might ward off evil air. He smells like burning rosemary and personal space violations. He doesn't touch you. Instead, he pokes at you with a long stick like he's testing bread in an oven. You moan something that sounds like, "Help," but he's already muttering in Latin, or maybe French, or gibberish. Who knows? You're sweating through your clothes and he's debating whether to bleed you or bless you. Option 1. Bloodletting. They believe your body is made of 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much of one? That's your problem. The solution? Drain it. So, he pulls out a dull, slightly rusted blade, probably the same one he used last week on your neighbour's thigh, and slices your forearm open to balance your fluids. No gloves, no cleaning, just confidence. Option 2. Herbal fumigation. He lights a small bundle of dried herbs, sage, maybe lavender, and swings it around your body like he's trying to summon a salad dressing. The smoke fills the room. You start coughing harder. He nods. That means it's working. Still not cured? Don't worry. He's got more in his medieval medicine kit. How about applying a live toad to the lump? Or tying garlic around your neck? Or stuffing crushed emeralds in your mouth? Can't afford emeralds? Good news. Onion paste and pigeon poop are also highly recommended. If your symptoms persist, which they will, he might prescribe chanting psalms, wearing a dead man's shirt, or walking in circles in the churchyard at midnight. And if all else fails, you're told to confess your sins and make peace with God. Because clearly, the plague is divine punishment for that one time you stole a turnip. Oh, and no antibiotics. Germ theory? Centuries away. To them, sickness isn't caused by bacteria. It's bad air, bad morals, or maybe Saturn being in a mood. So when your family asks if the doctor helped, you smile weakly and say, "He burned herbs and bled me." They nod like that makes sense. Because here, it does. Welcome to medicine, medieval edition. If the plague doesn't get you, the cure just might. Beliefs and rumours. Who's to blame for the plague? As your fever worsens and the town bell rings for yet another body, you start to wonder the same thing everyone else is whispering. Where did this curse come from? Who brought the plague? Who's to blame? Because make no mistake, somebody has to be. It couldn't possibly be the rats crawling through your pantry, or the fleas chewing on your ankles, or the rotting meat festering in the summer heat. No, that would make too much sense. Instead, the town's collective wisdom has settled on a few more colourful theories. Let's start with the obvious scapegoats. Foreigners. Any traveller, merchant, or someone who speaks a different dialect. Clearly suspicious. People are being chased out of villages just for having the wrong accent or wearing strange shoes. The less people understand you, the more likely they think you're a harbinger of death. Multilingual? Great. Now run. Next, the Jewish community. Persecuted for centuries, and now conveniently blamed for poisoning wells. Entire neighbourhoods burned to the ground, not because of evidence, but because mass panic needs a villain. Never mind that they're dying too. Facts don't do well in plagues. Then there are the women, especially the ones who live alone, know about herbs, or make too much eye contact. Midwives, healers, widows, unmarried women over 30, suddenly they're all witches. Did you survive while others died? Witch. Did you die? Still suspicious. You're not safe either. Last week, someone saw you talking to a black cat. Another neighbour noticed you don't always bow low enough at mass. That's enough for a quiet accusation and a loud execution. People are nervous and scared and honestly bored. Burning someone feels productive. And then there's God. A popular theory says he's just really, really mad. About what? No one agrees. Maybe greed, maybe lust, maybe that time Brother Anselm spilled wine during communion. But the church says the plague is punishment. So people start flogging themselves in the streets, crying, bleeding, singing. Groups of them wander from town to town, turning repentance into a full-body workout. Meanwhile, astrologers claim it's because Saturn and Mars aligned wrong. Others say it's bad air from the east, carried on the wind by demons. Some people hang onions from their doors. Others burn sulphur or wave their arms wildly when anyone sneezes. You realize, as you lie shivering on a straw mat, that no one actually knows what's going on. Not the priests, not the healers, not the nobles, not even the plague doctor with his fancy mask and garlic necklace. But fear doesn't wait for certainty. It just needs someone to point at. And when the mob comes knocking, facts won't protect you. Only luck or silence might. Funerals. Quick, grim, and crowded. Someone in your house didn't make it through the night. You knew it was coming. The wheezing got worse. The skin turned blacker, and the fever finally won. Your mother, your brother, your neighbour's cousin. At this point, the list is long and always growing. You don't cry. Not because you're numb, though you are, but because you're busy figuring out what to do with the body. Welcome to the medieval funeral process. It's quick, it's brutal, and it's happening about 30 times a day. There's no coffin. That would take wood, nails, and someone willing to come near the corpse. No one is. You can't even convince the village priest to come bless the body, unless he's already passing by, masked, gloved, and mumbling Latin from a suspiciously safe distance. So, you do what everyone else does. You wait for the cart. The cart comes once or twice a day, pulled by tired men with tired eyes. They don't knock. They just shout, "Bring out your dead." A line you thought only existed in dark jokes. Until now. You and your remaining family lift the body onto the wooden platform. There's no time for wrapping, no ceremony, no last words. Just a quick glance, a whisper, maybe a prayer. You're not allowed to follow them. The graveyards are full, the priests are overwhelmed, and the ground is too frozen or too soft or too cursed. So they dig wide, shallow pits outside the town, plague pits, and stack bodies like firewood. Sometimes, if the diggers are feeling generous, they'll toss in some quicklime to slow the smell. Sometimes, they don't. You've heard rumours that people are being buried alive, mistaken for dead because they passed out or were too weak to speak. You try not to think about that, but the image lingers. There's no black clothing, no flowers, no eulogy, just dirt and silence, and the choking stink of death. And if you're rich, you might get a more dignified burial, maybe a private corner, maybe your own hole, but don't count on it. The plague doesn't care about your titles or your land. Everyone rots the same way. Later that evening, you sit near the fire, or where the fire used to be, and realize there's no one left to tell the stories. No songs, no toasts. Just more coughing, more scratching, and the knowledge that tomorrow, the cart will come again. And someday soon, you won't be the one watching. You'll be the one getting wheeled away. Survival isn't much better. You survived. Somehow, maybe by luck, maybe by genetics, maybe because the fleas just skipped you, you're still breathing. The fever broke. The swelling stopped growing. Your skin no longer looks like old fruit. And yet, there's no relief, no parade, no medal, no one claps. In fact, people avoid you now more than ever. You're a walking ghost, a reminder that the plague isn't done yet, that it spares some, but for reasons no one understands and no one trusts. You walk through the village and realize there is no village, not anymore. Half the huts are empty, the other half house silence, or someone muttering to themselves in the corner. Children cry without being held, dogs howl without owners, chickens roam like they're in charge now, and honestly, they kind of are. You try to find food. The baker is dead, the miller is dead. The market hasn't opened in weeks. What's left is rotting in cellars or hoarded behind locked doors. You eat what you can. Old bread, wrinkled apples, something that used to be cheese but now has ideas of its own. You try to return to work, but there's no one to give orders. The lord of the manor? Gone. The field hands? Buried. The blacksmith's forge is cold, and the forge master hasn't been seen since he started coughing and walked into the woods. You think of leaving, heading to the next town, but you've heard stories, how strangers are beaten at the gates, chased off with stones, or forced to strip naked in the river to prove they're not carrying death in their clothes. So, you stay, alone. Alive, sort of. The quiet is worse than the coughing ever was. No songs, no gossip, just wind through the cracks in your hut and the occasional creak of wood, settling like bones. You start talking to yourself, Not because you're mad, but because silence is too loud. You try praying, but even the priest is gone, and the church feels more haunted than holy now. And here's the cruelest part. You survived the plague, but the world you survived for is gone. The people are gone. The joy is gone. The rhythm of life, market days, feast days, gossip in the fields, is broken, and no one knows how to start it again. You expected survival to feel like victory, but it feels more like waiting. Waiting for the world to remember how to live. Food and water, still a threat. You're hungry, again. But hunger during the Black Death isn't just about missing a meal. It's about staring at an empty bowl and wondering if eating anything might kill you faster than the plague itself. The pantry is bare. The garden has been left untended for weeks. The goats have either died or been stolen, or possibly promoted to village council. You check the corner where you used to keep a sack of barley. It's gone, or maybe it's still there, just disguised under a thick layer of mold that looks like it's developing a personality. You find some bread, hard as stone, covered in a fuzzy grey layer. You break a chunk off and knock it against the table. The table loses. You eat it anyway, not because it's edible, but because not eating it is worse. Water? Still risky. The well is suspicious. No one's cleaned it, and it now smells faintly like regret and something recently deceased. Rumour has it, someone dumped a corpse down there last month to save space. You consider boiling the water, but wood is scarce, and you're too tired to light a fire anyway. So, you reach for beer. Yes, beer. At dawn, at noon, at midnight. Not because you want to party, but because it's the only thing that's been boiled and won't kill you instantly. It's weak, sour and warm, but it won't give you dysentery, and that's a luxury now. You dream of meat. Then remember the last time you had any. A squirrel, roasted hastily over a fire fueled by old floorboards. You shared it with 2 cousins and a dog. You got the tail. The dog got the better deal. Fruit? Only if you count the shriveled apple with 1 good bite left. Cheese? Technically yes, but it's hard to tell if it's still cheese or has evolved into something philosophical. You eat it anyway. Your stomach protests. You tell it to shut up. Sometimes, you scavenge from abandoned houses. A sack of dried peas here, a jar of honey there, but you're not alone. Every survivor in the area has the same idea. Food is now currency. People trade old shoes, tools, or favors for a handful of oats. And you haven't even seen salt in weeks. Pepper? That's a myth from the time before death. Every bite you take is a gamble. Every sip is a dare. You don't eat to feel full. You eat to stay vertical. And even then, the line between survivor and next on the cart is just one bad mushroom away. The church. Hope or fear. Eventually, when your stomach stops growling and your fever plateaus at just survivable, you think of the only place that might still offer answers. The church. Because surely, if anyone knows what's going on, it's God, or at least the priest who claims to have him on speed dial. You drag yourself toward the small stone building at the edge of town, the one with the leaning cross and the permanently closed door that somehow still creaks. Inside, it's cold, dark, and smells like wet wood, melted wax, and quiet desperation. The pews are half empty, the congregation even less so. Those who still come sit far apart, not out of caution, but out of superstition. You find a spot and lower yourself down. The bench groans. So do your knees. The priest appears, robed in black, eyes hollow from too many funerals, and not enough faith. He doesn't smile. He barely speaks above a whisper. Instead, he reads from a Bible you can't read yourself, because it's in Latin, and you're not a monk, a noble, or that one kid who got tutoring from a friar. What you do understand are the warnings. The plague is punishment. You must repent. Pray harder, sin less, fast more. Because apparently, this whole catastrophe is the result of gluttony, or pride, or that one time your cousin swore during a storm. Specifics are unclear, but the fear is crystal clear. Around you, people weep silently. Some chant, others flagellate, yes, beat themselves with whips, believing pain will cleanse their souls. The priest doesn't stop them. In fact, he nods solemnly, as if to say, that's the spirit. There is no comfort here, no warm choir, no candles lit for hope. Just guilt, doom, and Latin words you don't understand but feel anyway. You try to confess, but what do you even say? Forgive me, Father, for I coughed twice and wished I had more soup. Outside, someone rings the death bell again. Inside, no one flinches. We're used to it now. Still, despite the fear and gloom, you keep coming back. Because in a world where medicine is guesswork and meals are death threats, faith is the last thing left that doesn't require wood, silver, or a goat to trade. Whether it brings hope or just fear in nicer robes, you're not sure. But when there's nothing else to believe in, you hold on to whatever you can, even if it only holds you back. Social reactions: fleeing, flagellation, and the end times. You used to think your neighbours were relatively normal. Yelled at their goats occasionally, haggled too hard over barley, mildly judged you for not bowing low enough at church. But now, everyone has cracked, in their own, uniquely disturbing way. Some have chosen denial. They walk through the village smiling, singing hymns, acting like the smell of decay and the constant cart passing isn't real. They call it faith. You call it nervous breakdown with a catchy tune. Others have gone the opposite way, full doomsday mode. They're hoarding onions, burning herbs, wearing charms, rubbing themselves in vinegar, or, your personal favourite, tying live pigeons to their pustules. Apparently the birds absorb illness. You're not sure if that's how biology works, but no one's in the mood for peer-reviewed science right now. And then there are the flagellants. You hear them before you see them, marching into town in a slow, eerie rhythm, chanting mournful psalms while whipping their own backs raw. Blood drips onto the road. They believe punishing themselves publicly will convince God to call off the plague. You're not sure if it's working, but they've definitely nailed the drama. Children hide indoors. Dogs roam in packs. Some people light fires in their homes and just sit there, watching the flames, as if waiting for something, anything, to end. A few have tried to flee the town entirely, packing what little they own and heading for the hills. But most roads are blocked. Villages no longer welcome strangers. If you approach a new town, you're more likely to be met with torches than tea. A growing number are convinced this is the end of days, that the 4 horsemen are just around the corner. That judgment day has arrived, early, unannounced, and very, very hands-on. And in fairness, they might be right. After all, what's left? Crops are failing, graves are full. The sky feels heavier, and the silence at night is so thick you can hear your own heartbeat and wonder, is that normal? Still, in the chaos, people find strange ways to cope. Some drink endlessly. Others gamble with whatever they can find. Coins, bones, scraps of bread. A few even fall in love, or at least in lust. Because what's the point in waiting for tomorrow if tomorrow isn't guaranteed? Society hasn't collapsed all at once. It's peeling apart slowly, like a rotten onion layer by layer, and you're stuck inside it, trying not to cry. Or worse, laugh a little too hard. Children, no school, no play, just survival. You hear a small cough behind you, not deep and ragged like the sick, but light and high-pitched. A child, one of the few still around. You turn to look. She's maybe 7, barefoot, her hair tangled into something between straw and defiance. She holds a stick in one hand and a turnip in the other, both with equal reverence. That's her toy and her lunch. Possibly both, because childhood doesn't exist here. Not the way you remember it. There are no schools, no wooden toys carved with love, no bedtime stories or gentle lullabies, only tasks. And silence. And rules like, don't drink from the green bucket or don't follow the rats. Children in the plague era aren't raised. They just sort of continue. If you're 5 and you can walk, you're useful. You're sent to fetch water, carry firewood, feed animals, or scrub something that will never truly be clean. There's no playing in the fields unless it involves chasing escaped chickens or gathering herbs no one's sure are safe. Hide and seek isn't fun when hiding can mean life or death. And most of the kids you used to play with, they're gone. No one talks about it. There's no time. Grief is a luxury. So instead, children absorb it all silently. They watch adults panic, mourn, scream, pray, and fall apart. And they learn, keep your head down, keep moving, don't ask questions. When a child coughs, people don't rush over with blankets and medicine. They wait. They watch. Because one cough could mean nothing, or it could mean there'll be one fewer mouth to feed tomorrow. Either way, you don't get attached. Older kids take on roles of adults who vanished. 10-year-olds act like they're 30. They carry smaller siblings, prepare meals, dig shallow graves when no one else will. You once saw a boy no older than 8 guide his blind grandmother to the church steps, whispering psalms the whole way. Then he sat outside alone, holding her shoes. There's no someday in their eyes. No dreams of becoming knights or scholars. Just a quiet hope for one more meal, one more sunrise, one more day without swelling. You look at them and realize they haven't lost their innocence. They never had the chance to grow it. And when the plague finally lifts, if it ever does, these are the ones who'll inherit what's left. Not because they're ready, but because there's no one else. Women, accused of witchcraft for living too long. You're still alive. You've made it this far. And if you happen to be a woman, well, that's suspicious. Because in the eyes of your neighbors, surviving a plague that's wiped out half the town isn't just lucky, it's unnatural, possibly magical. And magic, of course, is just another word for dangerous. You see, being a woman in this time already means walking a tightrope made of expectations, superstition, and straw. You're expected to be obedient, pious, clean, somehow, and silent, definitely, but also resilient, nurturing, and useful. Break even one of those invisible rules, and congratulations, you're now a problem. Now add surviving the plague. Maybe you made a poultice from garlic and herbs. Maybe you boiled your bedding. Maybe you just had the sense not to drink from the river behind the butcher's house. Doesn't matter. If your family died and you didn't, people will stare. They'll whisper. They'll say, "She must have made a deal with something." It starts small. A neighbor stops speaking to you. Children make the sign of the cross when you pass. Then someone mentions that you always had odd eyes, or that your garden still grows when others don't. You helped a sick child recover? That's not gratitude, it's evidence. If you're unmarried and over 30, strike 1. If you live alone with a cat, strike 2. If you read brew teas, or, God forbid, laugh during a funeral, strike 3. You're a witch, or soon will be. The punishment? Public accusation, maybe a trial, but more often, just firewood and fear. You could be drowned to prove your innocence. If you float, you're guilty. If you sink, you're innocent and dead. Either way, justice served. Ironically, the women most at risk are often the ones trying to help. Midwives, herbalists, caregivers. The ones who carry knowledge passed from mother to daughter. The ones who listen, observe, heal. That knowledge isn't honored. It's feared. And here's the worst part. Other women will turn on you too, because when survival depends on being invisible, solidarity is dangerous. So you keep quiet. You don't share what you know. You hide your remedies. You downplay your strength, because in a time where death is everywhere, somehow being a woman who doesn't die makes you a target. You survive the plague, only to be hunted for it. The aftermath. 1/3 of Europe gone. Weeks pass, maybe months. Time doesn't work the same anymore. The bells don't ring on schedule. The sun rises and sets over half-empty streets, and no one's marking feast days or harvest festivals. Why celebrate a calendar when the world has stopped? You step outside and realize it's quiet, too quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the hollow kind. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you wonder if the world forgot to breathe. The village is smaller now, not just in people but in presence. Entire families gone, fields overgrown, doors swinging open in the wind like mouths that never finished their last sentence. Roads once busy with carts and gossip now only carry wind and rats. You walk past 10 houses, maybe 2 are still inhabited, and even then, you're not sure. Some people stay inside, afraid the air still kills. Others have gone, some fled, some followed the carts, some simply disappeared. No one knows the full numbers, no one's counting, but word travels. From town to town, whispers spread like smoke. 1/3, maybe more. They say 1 out of every 3 people in Europe is gone. Dead, buried, burned, forgotten. You do the math in your head. Family, friends, that old woman who sold onions, the boy who carved wood animals. Gone. Not just individuals. Entire trades, generations, surnames, erased from the map. Churchyards are full. Some towns bury their dead in fields. Others toss them in plague pits, layered like loaves of unwanted bread. There's no room for mourning. The pace of death has outpaced grief. And yet, grief lingers, quietly, under everything. It's in the way people avoid eye contact, in how laughter sounds guilty, in how no one sings anymore. You expected plague to look like fire, fast, loud, consuming, but it looks more like erosion, bit by bit. It eats the world until all that's left is bones and memory. There are no memorials, no national mourning, no day after to reset and rebuild. Just survivors walking through the ruins of normal life, trying to remember what normal even was. You sit by the edge of a fallow field where wheat used to grow. A single crow lands nearby. It stares at you as if wondering why you're still here. Sometimes you wonder the same. And yet, despite it all, you remain. Not because you're stronger, or better, or chosen, but because you were missed. By the disease, by the chaos, by whatever roll of the cosmic dice kept you breathing. 1/3 of the continent is gone, but you're not. And now the question is, what do you do with what's left? Modern comparison. Complaining about weak Wi-Fi. You sigh, rub your temples, and mutter something under your breath. Not because someone just died, not because your food spoiled, but because your Wi-Fi dropped for 12 seconds and your video buffered. Tragic. And you're not alone. Somewhere, someone's upset because their oat milk latte was made with regular milk. Someone's rage tweeting about traffic. Someone else is ready to file a complaint because their package arrived a day late. We've all been there. Minor annoyances feel big in the moment. But then, you remember 1,348. You remember waking up on straw, soaked in sweat, scratching at flea bites, and wondering if today's the day your armpit explodes into a bubo the size of a potato. You remember drinking warm beer at 6 a.m. because the water would kill you faster. You remember using leaves as toilet paper, sharing a bucket with your whole family, and sleeping 3 feet from a dying cousin while a rat chewed on your only sock. Suddenly, a cracked phone screen doesn't seem so catastrophic. In the Middle Ages, people didn't unplug. They didn't even have plugs. No hot showers, no painkillers. No Netflix to binge when the world felt like too much. Just firewood if you were lucky, and prayer if you dared. Miss a text? You panic. Miss a prayer bell in 1348? That's a sin. Possibly punishable. Today, we Google our symptoms before seeing a doctor. Back then, the doctor wore a bird mask and bled you with a knife. You worry about your job being unfulfilling. A medieval peasant's job was, don't die while digging turnips for your landlord, and there's no PTO when you collapse. You either keep working through the fever, or someone else takes your place. Your worst day might involve a delayed flight, a spilled coffee, and an awkward Zoom call. Theirs involved digging graves for relatives in the morning, and praying to not join them by nightfall. And yet, through all that, they lived, they laughed, told stories, fell in love, raised children, even danced, not because life was easy, but because surviving at all was a miracle worth celebrating. So the next time the Wi-Fi drops, or your online order arrives in the wrong shade of beige, take a breath. Look around. You have antibiotics, running water, soap, Spotify, and a bed without straw, bugs, or livestock. You don't need to feel guilty, just maybe a little grateful. Because in 1348, you wouldn't last a day. But here, you're doing just fine. So here you are, alive, warm, maybe sipping tea in a clean bed with 4 pillows, soft lighting, and walls that don't leak. No rats, no buboes, no plague cart rolling past your window. And yet, you just spent the last 20 minutes walking in the shoes of someone who had none. Someone who woke up coughing in a straw bed, watched loved ones disappear one by one, and still managed to carry water, bury the dead, and hold on to a shred of hope. It's strange, isn't it, that even in a world that smelled like death, and lived in fear of invisible things, people still sang songs, still told jokes, still made bread, still tried. Because that's what humans do. Even when the sky is falling, we look for a patch of ground to stand on. You wouldn't last a day in their world. That's true. But they wouldn't believe yours is real either. Tap water? Medicine? Magic screens that let you talk to people across oceans? Heating with the turn of a dial? They'd call it sorcery. Or heaven. And yet, here you are, breathing, complaining sometimes, sure, but also laughing, healing, hoping, dreaming, just like they did, because survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just quiet persistence, waking up, making tea, holding your loved ones, choosing kindness over despair. So tonight, maybe take a second before you sleep. Look around your room, your safe, clean, plague-free room, and say a quiet thank you. Not just for the medicine or the plumbing or the mattress with actual support, but for the people who came before, who endured hardship you can barely imagine, and still, somehow, left enough light behind for you to see your way forward. Good night, sleep well, and may your dreams. You've seen the pictures, golden deserts, blinding sunlight, and a massive triangle rising from the sand, perfectly stacked stone after stone, reaching for the sky, the Great Pyramid of Giza, a wonder of the ancient world, a monument to divine kings, a marvel of human ingenuity. But behind the symmetry and awe lies something rougher, something sweat-soaked, something ordinary, yet extraordinary in its pain. Because for every block of limestone you see in that majestic structure, there was a man underneath it, a man with sunburned shoulders, blisters, cracked fingernails, a back sore from bending and dragging and lifting, day after day, year after year. I know this because, well, I was one of them. Not really, of course, but imagine with me for a moment. It's the year 2570 BCE. You're not a priest, or a scribe, or some elite bathed in oils. You're just a regular worker, a villager, a farmer drafted into national service. Your field lies fallow, your tools are rusting back home, because now your tool is a rope, your job is a block. Your world is sand, sweat, and the distant shout of the overseer. You sleep beside your crew in a small stone hut. You eat onions and flatbread. You drink beer, not for pleasure, but because it's safer than water. And when the sun rises over Giza, you rise with it, ready to push the impossible 1 inch closer to finished. They told you it was an honor. They said your name would be remembered. But let's be honest, you were never going to enter the pyramid. You were never meant to. All you ever built was for someone else's eternity. This is not a story of kings. This is a story of the ones who hauled eternity, stone by stone, and vanished into the dust. Welcome to the other side of the pyramid, the side where greatness was carved out of the lives of the invisible. So who built the pyramids? Well, not aliens, not slaves in chains either, and definitely not the pharaoh himself, strolling in with a chisel and a dream. The truth is far more human, far more tiring. The Great Pyramid wasn't built by royalty. It was built by thousands of men like me, villagers, masons, farmers, dragged into something bigger than any of us could understand. Some of us volunteered, most of us didn't. We weren't prisoners, not exactly, but we weren't free to walk away either. They called it a corvée, a kind of national labor tax. Can't pay in grain, then pay in muscle. Pharaoh wants a pyramid? Guess what? You're it. I was a farmer once, had a patch of barley near the river. Not much, but enough, until a man showed up with a list, said it was my turn. I packed a satchel, kissed my wife, told her I'd be home before planting season. I wasn't. We worked in crews, 20 men, 1 leader, and 1 guy who never seemed to work, but always had a stick in his hand. We pushed, we pulled, we shouted, we bled. The blocks weren't small. Some weighed as much as a car, and we had no pulleys, no engines, just ropes, sleds, and each other. The sound of groaning wood, sand grinding under our sandals, the scrape of stone on stone. It stays with you. Someone's always coughing, someone's always limping, someone's always quitting, and when they do, you cover for them, because no one else will. The crew keeps moving. The block must rise. They say we built it in 20 years. That's a lie. We rebuilt it every day in our bones. Still, it wasn't all misery. We had bread, flat, chewy, and warm when the ovens were working. We had onions, sweet when roasted in the coals. We had beer, thin, sour, barely alcoholic, but it filled the gaps in your stomach when food was low. We had songs, bad ones mostly. We sang about our feet, our backs, our overseers, and what we'd do if we ever got a day off. We never did, but the jokes helped. Laughter echoed between the stones when it wasn't drowned out by shouting. And strangely, we had pride. They told us we were part of something eternal, that Pharaoh was a god, that his tomb would pierce the sky and take him to the stars, and we, the builders, would be part of that legacy. It was nonsense, of course. But when you're knee-deep in sand, covered in dust, and dragging 5 tons of limestone across the desert, sometimes nonsense is all you've got. I met a man once, older than the rest of us, nearly 40. He walked with a limp and had only 8 fingers. He said this was his 3rd pyramid. I asked him why he kept coming back. He smiled. I like seeing something rise, even if it crushes me. That stayed with me. We weren't just building a tomb. We were building a mountain, one that hadn't existed yesterday. Every stone was a bruise, a splinter, a piece of your life you'd never get back. But when you looked up and saw that line of white blocks against the sky, something inside you stood taller. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was delusion. Maybe it was both. We didn't live at home. They housed us near the site, in long rows of stone huts, 10 to a room, packed like pottery. The nights were cold, the mornings colder. Your breath fogged in the air, and you could feel the sand in your teeth even while sleeping. Sometimes people got sick. Sometimes they didn't wake up. The foreman would drag the body away before breakfast and slide someone new into the crew by noon. No prayers. No names. Our names didn't matter. Only the stones did. Historians later found bones with healed fractures, signs of medical care. They said we were treated well. Maybe. Or maybe we just got patched up so we could keep working. A broken rib doesn't matter if your hands still work. People love to romanticize this. They say, at least you were part of something great. But they weren't there. They didn't feel the weight. They didn't cry in the sand when your friend lost his foot to a falling block. They didn't carry your crewman's rope after he collapsed from sunstroke. I did. And when the day came that the pyramid stood complete, glowing in the sun, perfect and immense, they threw a feast. Bread, more beer, maybe even a piece of goat if your supervisor liked you. We stood at the base and looked up. No names carved into the stones. No statues of us outside. Just one man buried inside, with treasures we never saw, guarded by curses we never feared. We built him eternity, and then we went home, if we still had one. The day didn't begin with the sun. It began with shouting. You hear it before your eyes open, a harsh voice slicing through the cold desert air, calling you by number, not name. Your legs ache from the day before. Your shoulders feel like stone, but there's no time to lie there. You sit up. The ground is hard. So is the bread. You chew it anyway, flat, dry, mostly sand at this point. You wash it down with a gulp of beer, lukewarm, thick, barely fermented. Breakfast of champions. Then you go outside. The sky is a pale grey, not quite morning yet. Around you, dozens of other men stir from their stone huts, all with the same look in their eyes, tired, resigned, and already sore. Some limp, some cough. No one talks much. Talking wastes breath, and you'll need every drop of it. You grab your gear, a rough rope sling, worn sandals, a rag to tie over your head, and join your crew. 20 of you in a line, one foreman with a stick, one stone block waiting. The stone weighs as much as 4 horses. It rests on a sled made of battered wood and prayers. You wrap your rope around your shoulder. The man beside you does the same. A sharp command cuts the air. Pull. Your feet sink into the sand. Your thighs scream. The rope bites into your chest like a whip. You pull again. The sled moves. A little. Just a little. And that's enough. Pull. This is the rhythm of the day. Pull. Rest. Pull. Curse. Pull again. You don't count hours. You count breaks. You get 2 long ones. One at mid-morning. Another when the sun is highest and most cruel. You crawl into shade where you can. suck down more warm beer, and eat another piece of bread so dry it cracks like pottery in your mouth. Your hands blister, then the blisters pop, then the raw skin hardens into callus. After a week, your hands no longer bleed. They just throb steadily, like a quiet drumbeat reminding you that you are alive, barely. The work isn't all hauling. Some days, you dig ramps, moving sand that returns the next morning like it never left. Other days, you chip stone with a copper tool that dulls faster than your patience. You curse the tool, the rock, the foreman, the pharaoh, and yourself for being born into this life, in this place, under this sun. But none of it stops the day from crawling forward. There's always dust, in your hair, in your food, in your mouth when you try to sleep. It clings to your sweat and turns you grey. You haven't looked clean in weeks. Sometimes there's injury. A snapped rope, a falling block, screams, then silence. The work doesn't stop. The body is carried away. Maybe someone mutters a few words. Maybe not. The gap is filled by someone else before the sun sets. You work until the sky turns red, until the stone is in place, until the overseer decides he's had enough shouting for one day. Then you're released. You walk back in silence. Dinner is more bread. More beer. A bit of lentil stew if you're lucky. You sit with your crew in a circle, legs folded, backs hunched. You joke. You laugh, dry and cracked. Someone tells a filthy story about a scribe and a priest's daughter. You laugh harder. You don't laugh because it's funny. You laugh because tomorrow you'll do this all again. Because if you don't laugh, you'll cry. And you've already cried enough in the sand. Night falls fast in the desert. You lie down on the same patch of dirt you've claimed as your own. You wrap your rag around your face to keep the wind out. You close your eyes. And you hope, truly hope, that when the shouting comes tomorrow, you'll still be able to stand, that maybe your rope won't snap, that maybe the beer won't be sour, that maybe the man beside you will still be breathing. You don't think about the pyramid. Not really. You've never seen the top. You don't even know how many blocks are left. The overseers count. You don't. You only count the days since you've seen your wife, since your son turned 5, since your hands felt anything but rope. They say this pyramid will last forever, that it's for the gods, that it matters. Maybe it does, but not to you. To you, it's just another block to move tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. You might be wondering, what kind of pay would convince someone to spend years dragging giant rocks through the desert? Gold? Land? A promise of glory? Number. The truth is, they paid us in onions. And beer. That's not a joke. I mean, sure, there were a few other things. Bread, garlic, the occasional bit of dried fish. But if you're expecting coins or treasure, you've clearly never worked a government job in 2570 BCE. Let me explain. We didn't get a wage. No clinking silver. No ledger with our names. Our payment came in the form of rations. Daily, fixed, and brutally simple. If the crew met its target, let's say dragging 6 blocks before sundown, we got full rations. Missed the target? Cut in half. No excuses. No discussions. So, what was in a full day's pay? Number 1. Beer. About 2 to 3 jars a day. Thick, cloudy, and warm. It was made from fermented barley and tasted earthy, if you're being polite. More like liquid bread than actual beer. But it kept your stomach settled, and more importantly, the water back then would probably kill you faster. We drank beer at every meal. We drank it between meals. Sometimes we drank it while working, which explains a lot about how accidents happened. Number 2. Bread. Flat loaves. Black on the bottom from overcooked coals, often full of sand from the grinding stones. Crunchy in places it shouldn't be. Still, warm bread with beer was considered a luxury, especially after a long day. Number 3. Onions and garlic. For flavor, for health, for morale. Egyptians believed onions had medicinal properties. I believe they were the only reason the bread was even edible. Number 4. Meat. Rare. Reserved for high productivity days or if someone important was visiting. Mostly dried fish or the occasional chunk of goat. If you smelled roasting meat, it meant someone had died, or the foreman was in a good mood. Either way, you didn't ask questions. You just ate. Of course, food wasn't the only thing we received. They built us living quarters, a workers' village. Tiny stone houses stacked like clay bricks. No privacy, no real beds. Just walls to block the wind and roofs that leaked during sandstorms. But they were better than sleeping out in the open. We had medical care too, of a sort. A few bone setters, herbalists and priests trained in spiritual healing. Broken limbs were splintered, wounds cleaned with honey. Prayers whispered to ward off infection. Did it always work? Number. But it was more than most people got back in the villages. There were even rumours of rewards. If you worked hard, maybe you'd be assigned easier tasks. Water hauling, mixing mortar, even tool making in the shade. The best jobs were those inside the pyramid itself, carving inscriptions or laying bricks. You'd be surprised how much men would fight to work in a dark corridor if it meant being out of the sun. And once in a while, if your crew really impressed the overseer, they threw us something extra, a rest day. That was the rarest gift of all. Still, let's be honest, none of this was compensation. It was maintenance. We were kept alive, fed enough to function, housed well enough to work, given just enough comfort to keep pulling that rope again the next day. Was it fair? Back then, it was normal. Most of us never knew anything else. The pyramid was the center of everything. Religion, power, eternity. Being part of it, even at the lowest level, was more than most ever got. It gave people purpose, a twisted kind of dignity. Some even felt honored. I remember one man. He lost 3 fingers in an accident. He came back a week later and asked to be reassigned to stone polishing. I asked him why. He just looked up at the pyramid and said, "If it's going to last forever, I want my fingerprints on it." We all laughed at him, but secretly, some of us understood. There were also the stories they told us, the spiritual perks, if you will. Work hard on Pharaoh's tomb, and in the afterlife, maybe you'll be remembered. Maybe your spirit will be welcomed into the field of reeds. Maybe you'll drink endless jars of beer under the stars. Or maybe you'll just die pulling a rock, be buried in a shallow grave near the worksite, and be forgotten. Who knows? That's what made it strange. We weren't slaves. We weren't exactly volunteers. We were stuck in between. Expendable but essential. Temporary but permanent. We were the fuel. They fed us just enough to burn. Next time you look at the Great Pyramid, try to imagine how many loaves of bread it cost, how many gallons of beer, how many onions peeled, how many backs bent. That's the true currency of eternity. You might ask, but why would they do it? Why would anyone choose this? To wake before dawn, to drag stone under a sky that shows no mercy, to give your body, your youth, to something you'll never even enter. Did someone force us? That's where things get complicated. No chains, no whips, not the way Hollywood likes to show it. Most of us weren't dragged here screaming. We walked. Willingly? Sort of. It wasn't really a choice, but it wasn't exactly slavery either. It was something worse. It was duty dressed as honor. Let me explain. In ancient Egypt, Pharaoh wasn't just a ruler. He was a god, the living Horus, the bridge between mortals and eternity. To work on his tomb wasn't just labor, it was a sacred offering, an act of devotion. That's what they told us. The state called it a corvée, mandatory labor for public projects. If you didn't have coin to pay taxes, you paid in sweat. You gave weeks, sometimes months, of your life. Your name was listed. Your absence was noted. If you refused, you didn't get dragged to court. You just disappeared from rations. No bread, no beer, no rights. Your family suffered, so you went. Some did it to survive, others to protect their children. A few actually believed in the glory of it all. I remember my uncle. He had a limp, a twisted foot from falling off a donkey years back. When the recruiters came, he hobbled forward anyway, said it was his turn. "I'll work slower," he grinned, "but the stone won't care." He wasn't trying to be brave, he was trying to matter. That's the trap. They never had to chain us. They just had to convince us it was meaningful. And in a strange, sad way, it was. There was pride. Real pride. You'd hear it in the way men talked during lunch breaks. My crew finished 2 blocks before midday. "We're working closer to the king's chamber." The overseer said we're the best on the line. We were covered in blisters and dust, but we were part of something. Something that would last forever, even if no one ever remembered our names. Then there was the village pressure. Imagine coming from a small town where every face knows yours. When the call comes to send workers to Giza and your name is drawn, you go. Not just because it's law, but because if you don't, people will talk. Coward, lazy, too good to serve the king? One man in my village tried to bribe his way out, said he was sick. The next day, he was found outside the granary, missing his shoes and his dignity. Nobody skipped after that. It's easy now, thousands of years later, to ask, why didn't they rise up? Protest? Say no? Because protest doesn't exist when your entire worldview is carved in stone. Literally, every temple, every wall, every priest's word reminded us, Pharaoh is divine. You are not. He rules this life and the next. Obey and you live. Serve and you rise. Defy and you vanish. Even the stars seemed to agree. The pyramids were aligned with them, as if the gods themselves watched our work, nodding in approval as we dragged one more block into place. Some came out of belief, some out of fear, most out of routine. Because when your father built for Pharaoh, and your uncle built for Pharaoh, and now it's your turn, you don't question it. You just pick up the rope and pull. You don't think about eternity. You think about lunch. And sometimes, the belief crept in anyway, like moss growing between bricks. You start to wonder, maybe this matters. Maybe the gods really see. Maybe if I pull hard enough, suffer long enough, someone will remember me. Even if they never say my name. Even if I'm buried in a ditch behind the quarry. Even if all I leave behind is a smudge on a wall that used to be white. You start to believe the illusion. Because it hurts less than the truth. I'll tell you something strange. Years after I left the site, years after the pyramid was finished, I went back, just to look. I stood at the base, my hands rough with age, my knees clicking like dry reeds, and I looked up at that impossible mountain of stone, and I thought, I helped build that. My fingers had touched those blocks, my sweat was in the cracks, my youth was baked into its shadow, and for a moment, I felt something like peace. Then the wind blew, and the sand shifted, and I remembered, it wasn't built for me, but I built it anyway, because someone had to. No one talks about what it really cost to build a pyramid. Not in gold, not in stone, but in flesh. We were told it was a job, a duty, a spiritual service. But it felt more like a slow erosion, one that ground down your bones, day by day, until you became part of the desert itself. Because the truth is, for every block stacked in Pharaoh's name, there were men who didn't get back up after placing it. The worksite was brutal. It wasn't just the weight, it was the repetition, the endless grind, the 1,000 tiny ways the job chipped away at you, until something broke, and then kept breaking. Ropes snapped, sleds collapsed, tools failed, and when they did, someone always paid the price. I once saw a man crushed between two stones. The sled behind him slid too far, no time to scream. Just one moment of silence, then a sound like a melon splitting. We stopped pulling for half an hour, while the overseers cleaned up what was left. Then we kept going. No ceremony, no burial, just gone. Injuries were constant, dislocated shoulders from pulling, sprained ankles from uneven ground, cracked ribs from falling tools, fingers lost to ropes and stone edges. You learned to work around pain. You had to. You couldn't afford to stop. If you limped in rhythm. If your hand bled, you wrapped it in cloth and kept dragging. There was a saying in the crew, "You're not dead? Then you're on duty." But sometimes, it wasn't the rocks that got you. It was your own body turning against you. Infection came fast. A small cut from a flint blade, and by sunset your arm was swollen like bread left in the sun. There were healers, yes, but their tools were herbs, honey, and prayers. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. Tetanus, gangrene, fevers with no names. If you were lucky, they burned the wound with hot bronze. If you were less lucky, they amputated. If you were least lucky, they left you under a tree and told you to make peace with the gods. We lived close, too close. 10 men in one stone room. No ventilation, no privacy, just shared breath and damp cloth. When one man coughed, the room coughed. Illness spread like fire. There were times when entire crews were taken out by disease. They called it bad air, but we knew better. It was sweat, rot, and exhaustion wrapped in heat. I remember the summer, a strange sickness moved through the workers' village. Men dropped day by day, fevered, delirious, babbling about the sun, singing to them. One by one, they stopped waking up. One by one, they were carried away. And still, we worked. Because the blocks wouldn't move themselves. Even rest hurt. Your back never stopped aching. Your fingers never uncurled properly. You slept curled like a rope, muscles locked from the day before. We used to joke that we didn't need to die to be buried. We were already under the weight of the pyramid. But some men never got to joke. They were buried for real. Where, you ask? Not in the pyramid, not even near it. They had a separate graveyard, behind the workers' village. No names. Just mounds of sand, a few markers carved with simple symbols. Maybe a chisel, maybe a sun. Some didn't even get that. If you died and there was no time for burial, you were taken into the desert and left. The jackals did the rest. It sounds harsh, but there wasn't time for grief. If we mourned every man who died, the pyramid would never get finished. So we learned not to look back. Historians today say we were well treated. They found bones with healed fractures, evidence of medical attention. But bones don't show suffering. They don't show the endless pain of waking up knowing today might be your last. They don't show what it's like to carry your friend's rope after he's gone, to eat beside an empty spot in the circle, to hear a laugh missing from the group and pretend you didn't notice. They don't show the ghosts. Because we had them. Every crew had stories. A man who still walked the ramps at night, a whisper in the quarry pit, tools that moved when no one touched them. Most of us didn't believe in curses. But we believed in memory, in echo, in things left behind that refused to be forgotten. Sometimes I think the pyramid isn't just a tomb. It's a graveyard stacked higher than the eye can see. So next time you marvel at its size, its precision, its beauty, pause. Think about what it cost. Not in royal treasures, but in broken backs, split knuckles, empty sandals. Think about the men who gave everything and got nothing but silence in return. We weren't heroes. We weren't soldiers. We were labor, but we mattered. Even if the stone never said so. When the shouting stopped and the sun dipped behind the limestone horizon, you'd think we'd rest. But rest wasn't the right word. It was more like pausing the suffering until sunrise. Because even after the ropes were dropped and the blocks were in place, the day was far from over. We walked back to the workers' village, slowly, limping, silent, in single file like ghosts in sandals. Our bodies weren't our own anymore. They belonged to the stones. We were just renting them in the off hours. The village itself was no paradise. You've probably heard that the pyramid builders were treated well, that we had houses, food, medicine, maybe even comfort. And in a way that's true, if you compare it to starving in the fields during a failed harvest. But when you picture home, try to imagine a rectangle of stone the size of a goat pen, 10 men inside. No windows, just straw mats and walls that trapped heat in the day and leaked cold at night. The air stank of sweat, onions, and feet. Someone always snored. Someone always coughed. If you were lucky, the roof held during sandstorms. If you weren't, you chewed dust with your dinner. Dinner. Now there's a word. It wasn't much. A bowl of lentil mush, maybe some boiled greens if supplies were good. Bread, as always, flat, gritty, and burnt around the edges. And of course, beer. Not the kind you'd toast with, but enough to blur the ache in your joints. We didn't eat for flavour. We ate for fuel. Calories meant another day of pulling. No one savoured anything. You just chewed, swallowed, and prayed it stayed down. Still, we ate together. That mattered. Evenings were strange. The body hurt, but the mind wandered. That's when the jokes came out. They were bad jokes. Filthy jokes. Recycled stories about foremen getting bitten by donkeys or pharaohs born with one eyebrow. We laughed anyway. Not because it was funny, but because laughter was the only protest we had left. You couldn't fight the system. You couldn't run from it. But you could laugh at it, just loud enough that it didn't hear you. Sometimes, we sang. Low, wordless hums that echoed through the alleyways between stone huts. Someone would beat a rhythm on a pot. Someone else would whistle. It wasn't music. Exactly. It was memory. A way to remember that we weren't just hands. That once, maybe long ago, we were men. We talked about home too. about wives, sons, daughters, fields waiting for us. Most of it was half-truths. Some of us hadn't seen home in years. Some no longer had one to return to, but lies were softer than silence. We patched our clothes with what scraps we could find, wrote messages in the dirt. One guy painted little gods on the inside of his hut wall with charcoal, just to feel watched. Another carved tally marks into the frame of his bed, one for every day he survived. The marks covered the whole frame. Then one morning, he didn't wake up. No one erased them. Sundays didn't exist. Time didn't exist. Just days and nights, pulling and pausing. Some men tried to keep track, built calendars out of stone chips or tied knots in rope, but eventually they gave up. When every day hurts the same, counting just makes it worse. We did get breaks sometimes, real ones. Every few weeks, if the quota was met and the overseers were feeling generous, we were given a rest day. It wasn't restful, just a chance to sleep a bit longer, wash if water was available, and pretend for a few hours that your life belonged to you again, that you weren't just a limb of the pyramid, that you were a whole person. The priests came by occasionally, offering blessings. They said our suffering was sacred, that our effort would echo through eternity, that the gods watched and approved. Some of us believed them. Most of us nodded and kept chewing. And then, night. The desert grows cold fast. The stars come out sharper than anywhere else, like spears of ice hung in the sky. Lying on your mat, staring at the ceiling, you'd hear it all. The soft breathing of exhausted men, the whisper of wind dragging sand against stone, the far-off howl of something wild. Some nights I dreamed of the pyramid, that it wasn't built of stone, but of people, of bodies stacked in place, holding each other up in perfect symmetry. Other nights, I didn't dream at all. Just darkness, deep and full, and before you knew it, morning. Another shout, another rope, another stone. We'd rise, not because we were ready, never because we were ready, but because the only thing harder than working was stopping. So, what was life after work? It was silence. It was survival. It was sore ribs, stale bread, and stale jokes that kept you human. It was everything between the blocks, the part of the story that didn't make it onto the walls, but mattered just as much. By now, you might be asking the most honest question of them all. If it was that miserable, why did they keep building it? Why didn't someone stop? Why didn't the work collapse under its own cruelty? Why did a structure that took decades, broke thousands of bodies, and offered almost nothing in return, still rise, one stone at a time? The answer, like the pyramid itself, is heavy and layered. We didn't build the pyramid for Pharaoh's ego. We built it because we were told it held the world together. In ancient Egypt, life and death were not opposites. They were a cycle. Pharaoh wasn't just a man in gold jewelry. He was the glue between gods and people. His tomb wasn't a grave. It was a machine for eternity, and we were its gears. We were taught that every stone placed in the pyramid helped the sun rise, that the afterlife required a vessel, and that vessel was sacred geometry, built by human hands. Refuse to build, and the world unraveled. Rain wouldn't come, crops wouldn't grow, the Nile would dry, the stars would lose their place in the sky. Belief can carry more weight than stone, even when your back is breaking. The pyramid wasn't just a tomb, it was the government, it was the economy, it was the schedule of our lives. It provided jobs, not good ones maybe, but in a world without coin, where land was owned by gods and nobles, working for Pharaoh was the closest thing we had to being part of something larger than hunger. Your village gave grain, you gave muscle, and in return, your name stayed on the tax scroll for another year. Work meant your family ate. Work meant your debts were ignored for a season. Work meant your name was not crossed out in red ink. The pyramid wasn't built on choice. It was built on trade-offs. No, we didn't believe we'd be buried inside, but some of us believed we'd be remembered alongside it. You'd hear it in campfire whispers. Maybe one day, they'll carve all our names on a wall. Maybe my son's son will come see my block. Maybe, when the gods look down, they'll see me too. It wasn't pride. It was the last thread of dignity you could afford to hold. Because when you're hauling the same limestone for the 5th week in a row, you have two choices. Either believe it means something, or accept that your life is being poured into nothing. Most of us chose belief, even if it was thin, even if it cracked. You didn't question Pharaoh, not in words, not in thought. It wasn't just the officials, it was your neighbors, your brother-in-law, the priest who said your soul would rot if you disrespected the work. Fear didn't scream, it whispered. You don't want to be that man, the one who skipped his duty, the one whose name never made it to the scroll, the one whose body the jackals found. So you picked up your rope and pulled, not because you believed, but because you didn't know how to stop. This might sound strange, but once it started rising, the pyramid became its own reason. Every month, it stood taller. Every day, it looked more impossible. You'd step back and stare, shoulders trembling, and think, I helped make that. Not all of it, not even most, but one line of stone, one edge, one scar under your fingernails that would last longer than your body. The pyramid didn't care if you suffered. But it couldn't rise without you, and somehow, that meant something. It was the only proof we had that effort could become monument, that something in this life, even if not ours, would endure. This was our world. Stone, dust, pain, duty, rations, rumours, a little beer, a lot of soreness, and the sense that stopping would be worse than moving forward. The pyramid was already halfway done when some of us arrived. Others were born while it was still rising. We didn't start it. We wouldn't see it finished. But we became a part of it anyway. It outlasted our strength, our hope, even our names, but it didn't outlast our fingerprints. Those are still there, in the cracks, under the mortar, in the quiet breath of eternity. So, why was the pyramid built? Not because Pharaoh demanded it, but because thousands of nameless, blistered, sunburned men, tired and half-broken, kept showing up day after day. Because the idea of stopping felt scarier than the work. Because belief is a strange kind of anchor. Because sometimes all we have is the weight we carry. And a dream, dusty and fading, that maybe, just maybe, the gods were watching. The Great Pyramid is one of the most famous things humanity has ever built. But when people talk about it, they talk about pharaohs, Khufu, god kings, the afterlife, sacred math, a monument to power. They forget about the men who made it real. Not the priests, not the architects, the workers, the backs, the hands, the nameless, the ones who bent under the sun and pulled rope until their palms split, the ones who walked barefoot in sand, so hot it burned skin, the ones who buried their friends behind the quarry wall, then went back to work before sunset. We don't know their names, but we know they were real. We found their bones, fractured and healed, their homes, tight stone quarters that still whisper dust, their tools, worn smooth by repetition, their fingerprints, still pressed into bricks, invisible but indelible. They didn't carve their names into the stones they lifted, but they left something else, something quieter, more lasting. Effort, because monuments aren't just made of stone, they're made of choices, of sacrifice, of thousands of mornings where someone got up and did the work, even when it hurt, even when it seemed pointless. That's what makes the pyramid a wonder, not just how it looks, but what it cost. The men who built it weren't heroes, they weren't saints, they were just people, flawed, tired, sometimes hopeful, sometimes bitter, but they showed up, they endured, they held the line. They gave years of their lives to a structure they'd never enter, for a ruler they'd never speak to, in a story that would never mention them. And yet the pyramid stands. It stands because of them. So the next time you look at it, whether in person, in photos, in a textbook, try to see more than the limestone. Try to see the sweat baked into each layer, the splinters, the fear, the quiet jokes shared over burnt bread and warm beer, the men who coughed in the dark but still woke up to haul another block, not because they believed in glory, but because the alternative was worse, because stopping meant shame, or hunger, or letting your village down. They weren't remembered by name, but they weren't forgotten by the stone. They remind us that history isn't only made by kings, it's built by the invisible, the cooks, the diggers, the carriers, the polishers, the men who didn't leave legacies, only effort, only pain, only proof that they were here. We walk on their labour, we marvel at their silence. And maybe, in some strange, quiet way, they knew. Maybe they understood that permanence doesn't come from names carved in walls, but from what you carry and what you leave behind without ever asking for thanks. They had no statues, but they were the foundation. They had no gold, but they gave everything they had. They had no names, but they had worth. And in the end, that's what the pyramid is. Not a tomb, not a symbol of Pharaoh, but a record of endurance, of ordinary people doing something extraordinary, stone by stone, block by block, step by back-breaking step. Their story isn't written in hieroglyphs, it's written in the weight, and it's still standing. I wasn't there when she gave the order. No one was, really. She never raised her voice, never stood on a pedestal, never wore a crown. She didn't need to. Her presence alone felt like a fire inside cold stone. That was Tomyris, queen of a people who didn't build empires but knew how to bury them. You've probably never heard her name. No poems, no marble busts in museums, no epic films where she rides into battle in slow motion. Just wind, dust, and one brutal act that slipped through history's cracks and somehow stayed burning. She was a ruler of the Masagetae, a nomadic people who lived where maps now write Central Asia, though back then it was just sky, steppe, and survival. We didn't call her Majesty, we called her Mother, not because she gave birth to us, but because she made sure we didn't starve, didn't freeze, didn't get swallowed whole by the horse lords to the east, or the empire pressing in from the west. She rode horses better than our best scouts, drew a bow with a steady arm, ate whatever we ate, bled when we bled, and didn't flinch when the gods stopped answering. When she lost her son, she didn't wail. She didn't collapse into grief like women in stories are expected to. She went silent for 3 days. On the 4th, she sharpened her blade. The man who took her son was no ordinary enemy. He was Cyrus the Great, Emperor of Persia, the man who claimed to own half the world. But for us, he was just another mouthful of lies. Tomyris didn't care about history. She cared about her people, her son, and the promise she whispered into the firelight. He will drink blood, enough to drown his pride. You've never heard her name, but after this, maybe you'll remember it. I was born beneath a sky that never stayed the same color for long. 1 hour, it burned silver blue. The next, it turned the color of steel or bruises. We had no cities, just tents and firelight. We followed our herds, carried our gods in cloth pouches, and read the future in the guts of animals. The ground was hard, the air sharper than any knife, and everything we had we earned by holding onto it with blood and muscle. Our land had no walls, no borders, just wind, space, and hunger. The Persians called it wilderness, barbarians, backward, but I've seen their cities, how they rot in peace. We didn't rot, we endured. Life among the Masagetae wasn't built for softness. We moved with the seasons, crossed rivers chest deep in cold, and slept with knives beneath our pillows. Every family lost someone to the elements. Wolves, winter, raiders from the east. And yet, even with all that, we lived. Not just survived, lived. My mother bore 6 children. Only 3 made it past the first year. When we got sick, we chewed bitter roots. If a bone broke, we prayed it healed straight. If not, you limped. You learned to ride anyway. You adapted, or you died. Food wasn't a guarantee. 1 month we'd feast on goat and flatbread, and the next we'd boil leather scraps and hope for marrow. Our hands were always cracked, our feet always calloused. Nobody I knew ever had clean nails. And still, on nights when the moon sat low and the fire was kind, we'd sing. Loud and wild, with voices that knew both grief and joy could live in the same breath. And then there was the war training. Boys and girls both, no exceptions. By the time I was 12, I could draw a short bow from horseback, dress a wound with ash and wool, and ride 2 days without water. Not because I was special, but because that's what life demanded. I still remember the first time I shot a hare through the eye at full gallop. My father didn't hug me. He just nodded and said, "Good, now try it in the rain." No one told us we were poor. We didn't know the word. We knew cold, hungry, watch the horizon. That was our wealth, awareness, reflex. The comfort of belonging to a tribe where every name meant something. And above it all, there was her. Tomyris. You'd think a queen would live apart, above, but she rode with us, ate with us, woke up to the same frost in her hair. She didn't sit on thrones. She sat cross-legged on wolf pelts, chewing jerky and eyeing the horizon like it owed her something. I saw her once, before the wars, crouched near the river, mending her saddle straps like any soldier. She nodded at me. Nothing royal in it, just recognition. We were both alive. That was enough. The elders said she was born under a blood moon, her first cry louder than the storm outside. They said she walked before she crawled. That might be myth. Doesn't matter. What I know is this. She feared nothing but failure. Not death, not pain, not even loneliness. And in a place like ours, that kind of courage wasn't decorative. It was survival. You see, out here death wasn't dramatic. It came without ceremony. A slip on the ice. A gut wound. A slow fever with no name. We buried people with their boots on and their weapons nearby, just in case the next world was as cruel as this one. But even in that harshness, we had rules. Codes. You didn't steal from your kin. You didn't waste food. You didn't speak the name of the dead until their ghost had time to cool. And above all, you didn't lie. Not because of honor, but because lies were a luxury. When you live close to the bone, truth is the only tool that keeps you warm. That's why Cyrus made us so angry. He came to us with words dipped in honey, offers of marriage, of alliance, of peace. But we knew what it meant when a man with an empire wants to marry a woman with a tribe. He didn't want her. He wanted the land under her hooves, the warriors at her back, the breath of independence we still exhaled. She saw through it. She always saw through it. And when she refused him, she wasn't just protecting herself. She was protecting all of us, our way of life, the cold, the truth, the harsh, hard-earned dignity of people who didn't worship golden statues or marble halls, but knew how to ride, fight, and survive without permission. Tomyris didn't tell us what to do. She showed us. That's different. So when the time came, when the sky darkened and word came that her son had been taken, we didn't follow her out of duty. We followed her because we were her. Her grief was ours. Her rage had been building in all of us long before the Persians came. But that part, that comes later. First, remember this. We didn't wear armor. We wore scars. We didn't kneel. We held the line. And we never forgot the name of the woman who stood at the center of the cold, with her jaw clenched and her eyes fixed on the west. Tomyris. She was the last warmth before war. I didn't know her as a legend. I knew her as a presence. She was never loud, never theatrical. You'd barely hear her enter a camp. But somehow, everything shifted when she did. The wind slowed. Conversations dropped into a hush that wasn't fear, just focus. You straightened your back, checked your boots, lowered your voice, without even realizing you were doing it. That was Tomyris. She wasn't born into luxury. We don't have palaces, remember? She was born into wind, grit, bone, and blood. Her father was a chieftain, not a king, not an emperor. A war leader who kept his people fed and safe. And for us, that was royalty enough. When he died, the council hesitated. The elders squinted at the horizon and murmured about sons, uncles, cousins. But she was the one who rode out first. I remember the day she returned from her first winter campaign. She had frost in her hair, a cracked lip, and 4 horses behind her, taken from raiders who thought our tribe would be easy pickings. She didn't speak much, just handed the reins to the children and went to wash the blood off her hands in the river. After that, no one questioned if she should lead. But leadership in our world didn't mean luxury. It meant last to eat, first to ride, first to bleed. She wore no gold, no cloak of fur. Her coat was the same rough-stitched leather as ours. The only difference? Her belt carried the blade her mother once used to carve bone, and a braid of horsehair tied tight at her wrist, a gift from her son, Spargapeses. That boy, he had her eyes, clear, sharp, full of things he didn't say. He was born on the edge of autumn, with a storm howling outside and Tomyris still bleeding when she cradled him. She didn't ask for help. She bit down on a stick and stitched herself. Said it was better to heal with your own hands than trust a trembling one. He was her softness, her laughter, when she had some. The only person who could tease her without risking their teeth. I saw her once, fixing his bowstring, grumbling that he never oiled it right. He just grinned. She shook her head, but there was warmth there, in her mouth, in her shoulders, a quiet kind of joy. She was a mother like any of us, protective, hard when needed, proud, in a way that didn't always show. But where most of us feared losing our children to fever or wild animals, she feared losing him to the world, to politics, to diplomacy, to the men who smiled with daggers behind their teeth. That's what made the betrayal so cruel. When Cyrus, the Persian king, sent his messengers with gifts and marriage proposals, we all felt the tension in the air. It wasn't just a political play. It was personal. He wanted her, wanted to own what he couldn't understand. And we knew that saying no to a man like that would have a cost. She didn't hesitate. She refused him cleanly, plainly. No anger, no fear, just one line. I am not the kind of woman who trades her land for silk. But Cyrus didn't take no like a man. He took it like a god. And gods, when refused, turn cruel. He lured her son, her only son, into a trap. A feast left behind as bait. Honeyed wine, meat on silver, enough for a warband. Spargapizes was young, brave, and maybe a little too curious. He rode with a small company, thinking it a gift of diplomacy. They drugged the wine, chained him. When he awoke, surrounded by Persian soldiers and Persian lies, he begged to die. They let him. That was mercy to them. We didn't see Tomyris cry. She didn't scream or curse the gods. She sat by the fire that night, still, hands folded in her lap. No one dared speak. The silence stretched into dawn, and then into the next dusk. On the third night, she stood up, picked up her son's dagger, and braided her hair. She spoke one sentence. He will drink blood. I swear it. And we followed. Not because she ordered it, but because her silence had become a language of its own. Because every mother in the tribe saw themselves in her. Because every father felt the knife twist in his own chest. Because we were tired of empires, thinking that people who lived in tents didn't know how to burn down kings. That was Tomyris. Not a symbol, not a myth, a woman, a mother, a commander who never wanted to conquer, only to protect. A soul stitched together with smoke, love, and unrelenting grief. And when the day came for vengeance, she didn't bring an army. She brought us, the ones who called her sister, leader, friend, and we didn't ride into history. We rode into memory. We'd heard of him long before we saw the first of his banners. Cyrus, the Great, the empire builder, the king who bent the knees of Babylon, swallowed Lydia whole, and marched across deserts like he owned the sun itself. His name came to us on the wind, wrapped in rumors and half-truths. Some said he was wise. Some said he was ruthless. Most said he was inevitable. But out here, in the land where firewood was precious and water wasn't promised, inevitable didn't mean much. We had no temples carved into cliffs, no libraries stacked to the ceiling. We had knives, salt, and a memory that didn't need parchment to survive. Still, I remember the first time someone told me what Cyrus had done to the cities to the west, how he'd let kings surrender, only to turn their heirs into slaves, how he'd promised peace and then laid siege under moonlight, how he'd taken the gods of others and placed them in his own pantheon, like trinkets on a foreign shelf. I was sharpening arrows by the fire when one of our scouts came back with the news. He's moving east. Just 2 words, but they sat in the stomach like spoiled meat. See, Cyrus wasn't just a king. He was the king, a walking continent. His army stretched across languages, dialects, and colours. Medes, Persians, Elamites, Lydians, soldiers with bronze armour and polished shields, riding horses fed on grain from lands we'd never even heard of. We didn't have numbers like that. What we had was silence, distance, and a queen who didn't flinch when she heard his name. Cyrus didn't send armies first. He sent envoys, always the smart move. Talk first, cut later. They brought wine, jewelry, bolts of dyed silk, gold plates that weighed more than some of our horses, and they brought words. Cyrus wishes only harmony. He admires your queen. He wishes to join houses, a union of equals. That last part made our elders chuckle. A union of equals. That's what lions say before they eat the lamb. The gifts were generous, yes, but the message beneath them was cold. Submit, or become the next footnote in history. Tomyris didn't raise her voice. She listened. She let the envoys finish their rehearsed little speeches. Then she stepped forward, touched the silk, turned over the plates, and looked the eldest envoy right in the eye. "Tell your king," she said, "that I drink from rivers, not from golden cups, and I do not marry men who measure love in land." The next morning the gifts were returned, untouched. The wine poured out on the earth like blood. We fed the silk to the fire. That's when we knew this wouldn't be settled with words. Cyrus didn't take rejection well. The stories that followed him always ended the same way. Walls crumbling, altars burning, people kneeling. And here was a woman, a tent-dwelling mother of warriors, daring to say no. So he changed tactics. If he couldn't win her with flattery, he'd win by cunning. That's when he left the feast. He ordered his army to stage a retreat, left behind wagons of wine, meats, fruits, pillows, soft as clouds. A travelling banquet, just waiting to be discovered. And we found it. It was her son, Spargapises, who rode ahead, leading a scouting party. Young, smart, brave. Too brave, maybe. He thought it might be a trap, but he also thought, what kind of army flees and leaves food behind? Maybe it was panic. Maybe it was a mistake. It wasn't. By the time the sun rose, they were surrounded, captured, and within days, word came back like a dagger to the chest. Spargapises had taken his own life in Persian chains. I don't remember who spoke first that night. Maybe no one did. We just sat near the fire and watched the flames flicker. The sound of grief out here isn't wailing. It's silence. It's the way someone stares at the floor for too long, the way they grip their knife handle without realizing. Tomyris didn't cry. She didn't rage. She stood. She braided her hair. And she made a vow. "You wanted to drink blood," she said. "Now you will drown in it." No fanfare, no orders. Just the promise of reckoning from a woman who had already lost everything worth protecting. We weren't afraid of Cyrus anymore. Empires look smaller when you realize they can still bleed. He thought we'd be another easy conquest, another tribe to flatten under sandal and scroll. But he'd forgotten one thing. We weren't fighting for land, or glory, or thrones. We were fighting for a mother who had nothing left to lose. And that's the most dangerous kind of woman you'll ever meet. I still remember the smell of that morning. Smoke from last night's fire, damp earth after snowmelt, and a sweetness in the air that didn't belong, something unnatural. A scent that carried promises, ripe fruit, roasted meat, wine, too rich for a place like ours, too inviting, like a smile that shows too many teeth. We didn't know yet what it meant. We only knew that the Persians had vanished, retreated, they said, left behind campfires still smouldering, half-covered wagons, footprints leading south. And then we found it. A feast, spread across the plains like a wedding gift. Pitchers of wine, gleaming plates, roasted lambs strung on spits, pillows embroidered with golden thread. I'd never seen that much food in one place. None of us had. And for a moment, just a flicker, we wondered, had Cyrus surrendered through generosity? Had he offered peace in the only language empires know? Excess? But peace doesn't smell that sweet. And generosity doesn't come from a man who just killed your answer. Still, Spargapises was young, sharp, clever, brave, but young. He led the forward scouts. He saw the feast. He felt the silence. And maybe, just maybe, he thought this was a gesture, a sign, an offering. He didn't want war. None of us did. Perhaps he hoped that if there was a way out, one without more blood, it might be worth exploring. So they stayed. Just a while. Ate, drank, watched the horizon, and then the arrows came. The Persians hadn't fled. They'd hidden, in the hills, behind the rocks, in shadows where sunlight didn't dare touch. The trap closed fast. They captured him, our prince, her only son. We didn't learn the details until later, too late. What we heard was scattered. Soldiers who escaped with wounds too deep to clean. Messengers who cried while they spoke. All we knew was this. He had been taken alive. And then he was gone. No ransom, no letter, no formal execution, just a whisper. He took his own life in a Persian cage. Some say he used the golden dagger they gifted him as a peace offering. Others say he asked for poison and they gave it with a grin. The truth? We'll never know. Not really. All I know is that the boy who once strung his mother's horsehair bracelet now lay cold in foreign dirt. And when the message reached her, she didn't move for hours. No words, no sound. She sat alone, her back to the fire, as the sun set and rose again. I watched from a distance, unsure if I should speak her name. No one did. We're taught in our tribe that grief is private, sacred. You don't touch it unless invited. You don't fill silence with noise just to feel useful. You let people break in peace. But Tomyris didn't break, not in the way we expected. On the second night, she asked for her son's saddle. Not his weapons, not his armor, his saddle. She sat beside it like she used to when he was a child, braiding her hair while he cleaned the straps. I'd seen that 100 times growing up. Mother and son, hands busy, no words needed. But this time her fingers trembled, not with weakness, with control. The kind of trembling that comes from a storm you're trying to hold inside. On the third night, she stood. And I swear to the gods, the air changed. It was as if the wind stopped just long enough to hear what she was about to say. And she said only this: "He will drink blood, enough to drown his pride." Then she turned and walked toward her tent. That was the end of the silence. The next morning, every warrior, every cook, blacksmith, shepherd, and scout began sharpening their blades. Not because she ordered it, because she didn't need to. That's how you know someone leads from the soul, not the title. She didn't raise an army. She called home everyone who had ever worn the Masagetae braid, and they came, from snow-capped steppes, from salt flats, from marshes and canyons and places too wild for even maps to name. Some rode 2 weeks, others came limping, some came blind in one eye, scarred, grieving, and all of us came angry. Because it wasn't just about a prince, it was about the lie, the trap, the cowardice of pretending to speak peace while hiding a blade in your sleeve. Tomyris didn't say his name again, not Spargapizes. Not aloud, she just carried his dagger with her, tied at her belt, handle worn from his hands. She didn't weep, not in front of us. But every time she ran her fingers over that dagger's hilt, I knew. She wasn't mourning, she was remembering. And remembering, in a world like ours, is a dangerous thing. Because we don't bury our dead beneath stone, we carry them with us. Into fire, into battle, into whatever comes next. They say revenge is loud, that it comes with war drums, shouting, and swords clashing under red skies. But when Tomyris prepared for war, it was quiet, too quiet. No speeches, no rallies, no long-winded declarations about glory or vengeance. Just one sentence, spoken once, low, steady. "He will drink blood." And that was it. From that moment on, we began to move like people who had already seen the end of the story. We sharpened blades, fitted horse saddles, braided our hair for war. We tied knots in our belts to remember the fallen, marked our cheeks with ash. But not one of us asked what we were doing, because we all knew. This wasn't conquest. This wasn't expansion. This was personal, and she made it clear. It would be done her way. She didn't want a sneak attack, didn't want to outwit Cyrus in the night, or poison his wine the way he'd done to her son. Number. She wanted him to see it coming. She sent a messenger, one man, on horseback, dressed in red, riding fast toward the Persian lines, with nothing but a cloth-wrapped scroll. The message was short, brutal. "You took my child. I will take your blood. If you do not withdraw, I swear by the sun you worship and the gods I do not fear, I will give you more blood than your empire can swallow." We never heard what Cyrus said in response, but we did hear what he didn't do. He didn't retreat. He stood his ground. Maybe he thought she was bluffing. That a woman, no matter how wild or grief-stricken, would think twice before riding against the greatest empire of its time. Maybe he believed that she'd wait, that she'd mourn, that she'd hesitate. He didn't understand what kind of mother loses a son to lies and keeps standing. He would learn. In the days after the warning, our camp changed. The quiet grew deeper. The kind of silence you only hear before a thunderstorm. Children were sent to the hills. Fires burned low. Everything was lean, stripped down to function. No ornaments, no ceremony. Just steel, smoke, and eyes that didn't blink enough. Tomyris never looked more alive than she did those days. Not angry, not weeping. Clear. That's the word I always return to when I think of her then. She had that same stillness you see in hawks before they dive. the kind that makes your spine straighten even if her eyes aren't on you. I rode near her once, 2 days before the battle. She didn't speak, but I could hear her breathing. Slow, deep, like she was speaking to something older than words. Later that night, she walked the camp. She checked the horses, the arrows, the water bags. She sat by the younger warriors and asked if their hands were steady. She touched the shoulder of an old scout who had lost his wife years before. She cleaned her blade alone, under the pale firelight, while we pretended not to watch. She wasn't preparing to die. She was preparing to make a man answer for thinking a mother's silence meant surrender. And then we rode. It wasn't a grand march. There were no horns or banners. Just hundreds of hooves pressing into frost-hardened earth. Just breath and leather, and the dull sound of steel on bone as we gripped our weapons like memories. We reached the edge of the Persian encampment just after dusk on the third day. They hadn't moved. Still confident, still armored. Still unaware that history doesn't always favor the side with better weapons or bigger maps. Tomyris stood at the front, her horse calm beneath her, steam rising from its nostrils. She didn't speak. She raised her son's dagger once in the air, then lowered it, and the line broke forward like floodwater. What happened after that? I can't describe with clean words. The ground was wet before the first hour passed. Persian archers fired blind into dust and smoke. Our riders moved like ghosts. Fast, silent, merciless. Their chariots got stuck in soft ground. Their generals barked orders too late. And she never left the front, even when her horse was pierced, even when a blade grazed her arm, even when a dying soldier tried to beg. She moved through it all like someone walking through a bad dream they'd already seen too many times. She didn't kill for bloodlust. She killed for clarity. And when Cyrus finally fell, when someone yelled that the great king had been struck down and we found his broken body among the mud and gold and silence, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like justice, served cold and without apology. They say she cut off his head. They say she placed it in a wineskin full of blood and whispered, "Now drink. You wanted blood. Now drown in it." I don't know if that's exactly what happened, but I do know this. She didn't smile. She just stood there, steady as ever, her son's dagger in her hand, and turned away from history like it never deserved her name to begin with. I didn't see the killing blow. Too much smoke, too many bodies, too many screams swallowed by dust and hooves and panic, but I saw what came after. When the battle was over, the air didn't clear. It just settled, heavy, wet, thick with the smell of iron and fire. That's what blood smells like, by the way. Not sharp, like people imagine. It's warm and stale, like copper coins left too long in the sun. The Persians had fallen, their lines broken, their officers scattered or dead. Some tried to run. Few made it. We didn't chase. This wasn't a hunt. It wasn't about numbers. It was about one man. They found Cyrus's body half buried, under a collapsed tent, crushed and bleeding. His armor had been pierced straight through the ribs. His eyes were still open, glassy, staring at nothing. I remember standing there, just outside the circle that formed around him. No one spoke, not even the ones who hated him. There was no cheering, no howling, no pounding of weapons against shields. Just breathing, tired, labored breathing, and her, Tomyris. She didn't rush toward the corpse. She didn't kneel. She stood still for a long time, horse reins still in hand, her hair falling loose from its braid. There was blood on her face. Not hers, I think, but she didn't bother to wipe it away. Then, with a quiet nod, she dismounted, walked through the field, boots squelching in mud and blood. When she reached him, she looked down, not with satisfaction, but something colder. Certainty. The kind of certainty that comes only after grief has burned through you and left behind bone. She unsheathed her knife, not her war blade, the one she used to cut hides and open bundles. Small, practical, familiar. And without a word she cut off his head. Not quickly, not cruelly, cleanly, as if this was the final act in a ritual that had been written years before. Some turned away, not out of fear. Out of respect, out of understanding that we were witnessing something sacred. She held the head for a moment, just a moment, and looked into its eyes. Then she turned, walked to one of the wine barrels we'd taken from the Persian supply wagons, and dipped the head into it. No one moved. No one asked why. But later, I heard the whisper. Passed from mouth to mouth, rider to rider, fire to fire. He thirsted for blood, so she gave him a cup of it. And that was it. No monuments were built. No songs written. The Persians would later try to erase the story, or twist it into something else, make it sound like he died bravely, or fell to illness. But we know, we remember, I remember, because I watched her walk away from that barrel, her hands red to the wrist, her face calm, not cold, not empty, just done. There was no roar of victory, no crowning, no celebration, just silence, and wind, and the faint sound of a woman breathing out everything she had carried for too long. People think revenge heals. It doesn't, but it settles. It makes space. It carves out a room in the chest where grief can sleep without clawing at the walls. After that day, she spoke even less. But her presence didn't shrink. It expanded. Quiet power. The kind that doesn't need permission. The kind that isn't waiting for history to write it down. The kind that just is. We buried our dead that night, quickly, with hands numb from cold and tired from rage. The ground drank everything we gave it. When we lit the fires, no one sang. We just sat, watching the flames, letting the heat soak into bones that no longer felt like our own. And in the morning, she was gone, not far, just riding the edge of the horizon alone. That's what she did now. She didn't sleep in the center of camp anymore. She kept to the outskirts, listening, waiting, watching. Some say she never really came back from that battle, that something in her stayed behind with that head in the barrel. Maybe they're right, but I also think she didn't disappear. She just stopped needing to be seen. The vengeance was finished, the promise kept, the story complete, but she was still our queen, still our mother. Still, the woman who taught us that the world does not bend to wishes, but it will answer to will, especially the will of someone who has already lost what matters most. So no, we didn't celebrate, we just remembered. Because that moment, that head, that barrel, that silence, wasn't for the world. It was for her, and it was enough. There are no statues of her, not where we come from. We didn't carve her face into stone or cast it in bronze. There was no crown sealed in glass, no throne left behind to be gawked at by scholars centuries later. That wasn't how we remembered. We don't build monuments, we tell stories. And in our stories, she never needed marble. Her legacy was carried in the way we braided our hair for battle, tight, low, practical. In the way mothers held their children a little longer before letting them go to train with the archers. In the silence that followed a death, where no one rushed grief, because we'd seen a queen sit in it without breaking. I think that's the part most people don't understand. Tomyris didn't die a hero. She didn't need to. She lived as one. After the battle, after Cyrus's head had been dipped in blood, and the sun had set on the last Persian banner, we returned to our camps. Not richer, not more powerful, just quieter. Something had shifted. Not in her, but in us. She never told us what to do next. Never demanded that we march onward or forge an empire of our own. That wasn't the point. We had defended what was ours. We had sent a message to the world. You can try to swallow us whole, but you will choke. That was her gift, her legacy, not conquest, but the right to stay ourselves. She never claimed to be divine, never asked to be remembered as more than what she was, a mother, a leader, a woman who bled and bled again, and still stood up every time. And so that's how we kept her alive. In little things, in the way we passed her name to daughters, not because we expected them to ride into war, but because we hoped they would learn when to say no. In the way we marked our blades, not with holy symbols, but with small etchings of wolves, hawks, or stars, because she once said, "Don't ask the gods to protect you. Be the thing they fear." In the songs we sang, quietly, while mending clothes or boiling bone broth for the sick. Songs not about glory, but about endurance. Sometimes outsiders came, years later. Historians, scribes, traders. They asked about the woman who killed a king. Some didn't believe she was real. Others insisted the story was exaggerated, made to inspire loyalty. I watched one man, Persian I think, sketching in a leather-bound journal. He asked me what Tomyris looked like. I told him, like wind right before a storm, like someone who doesn't flinch when death sits next to her at dinner. That's not helpful, he muttered. It wasn't meant to be, I said. See, what they wanted was record. What we had was memory. There's a difference. One can be erased. The other lives in bone. And hers lived long after she stopped riding with us. She grew old. Not weak, just slower. Her hair turned silver in strands, not all at once. Her scars stayed visible. She never hid them. Said it was better to let the children see what leadership actually costs. She didn't try to teach us lessons. She just lived them. Saturday quietly beside new mothers. Taught young boys how to read the weather by the way birds moved before sunrise. She once splinted my ankle with twine and pine bark and told me, "Don't scream. It'll pass faster if you stare into the sky." She was right. It did. Some say she died in her sleep. Others say she rode into the hills one last time and never came back. I don't care which is true. Because for me, and for all of us who truly knew her, she never really left. She was in the dust that clung to our coats, in the stories our grandmothers told when they couldn't sleep, in the sharpness of every no we ever had the courage to say. She was the reason we taught our daughters to hold a blade, not to fight, but to understand what it feels like to carry something sharp and know you might need it someday. That's legacy, not stone, not scrolls, but people who live differently after meeting you. And even now, centuries later, when her name gets mentioned in some forgotten history book, or mispronounced in a podcast, or romanticized on a mural in a museum that never saw blood, I smile. Because I know the truth. She wasn't meant to be remembered by the world. She was meant to become the reason we remember ourselves. So no, there are no statues of Tomyris. But if you've ever stood your ground when fear said run, if you've ever buried your grief and kept moving, if you've ever whispered a promise and made the world feel it, then maybe, just maybe, you've met her. And maybe that's enough. Some nights, when the wind howls through the cracks in my cabin and the fire won't stay lit, I wonder, would you have made it? Not for a week, not for a battle, just one day. One single day in our world, where the cold came in under the furs, where hunger sat beside you at breakfast, and you couldn't remember the last time you'd truly felt warm, where peace was a breath between storms, and love was a knife you kept in your boot, just in case. You'd wake before the sun, not because of duty, but because your body didn't know how to rest. You'd boil water from the river, muddy, bitter, but still a gift. You'd feed the horses before yourself. You'd check your gear, not out of discipline, but because forgetting a strap could mean death. You'd speak less, laugh quieter, learn quickly. And maybe, just maybe, you'd hear her name, whispered around the fire, or mumbled by an old warrior with a healed-over wound and a missing tooth. You'd hear it said like a charm, like a warning, like a prayer. Tomyris, not a queen with jewels and soft hands, a woman who lost her son and gave the world back a severed head in return, not for vengeance, but because the world needed to remember that some people cannot be conquered quietly. Would you survive beside her? Would you follow someone who didn't ask to be followed? Would you ride with us, not for empire, but for memory? Or would the silence break you before the sword did? It's okay if the answer is no, because here, in your time, this softer time, you carry your own battles. They may not draw blood, but they wear you down just the same. Deadlines, loneliness, that quiet ache that comes at 3 a.m. when the house is too still and your thoughts won't stop circling. Maybe that's why you're here, listening, wondering what it felt like to live in a world so sharp, so simple, so unforgiving. I won't romanticize it. It was hard. It was cruel. It was real. But here's what I'll tell you. Even if you wouldn't last a day in our world, you don't have to. Because maybe all you need is to remember that once, long ago, there was a woman who said no to an empire, and meant it. And maybe, if you remember her name the next time the world tries to swallow you, you'll find the part of you that doesn't flinch. And that's enough.